I'm Heinrich Taegtmeyer, and I'm a cardiologist, and I see patients, and I also have a PhD in biochemistry, and some people think that I'm nuts because I'm running a lab as well. I do two things. Care for patients, treat patients, and still do it after 37 years here at McGovern Medical School, and I also run my small lab with big ideas also for the same time, 37 years on the faculty of the medical school and faculty of the graduate school of biomedical sciences. So I've been asked many times, how did you end up in Houston? And the answer is very simple, because I needed a job. And I'll tell you a little bit about my background, because a career of an academic physician is not as straightforward and as simple as it appears to outsiders, I would say. And I take my own journey as a challenge that I have, begun and continued over so many years together with my small family. We are all, my wife and I were born in Germany and grew up in Germany, and also went to medical school in Germany, and we had our early training and education in Germany. In fact, it was an accident that exactly 50 years ago, a group of American physicians came to medical school in Freiburg and were looking for young doctors to fill positions in internships, rotating internships in New Jersey and New York and Pennsylvania. And it sounded to me quite attractive because after the war in Germany, there was not much opportunity to look outside. We grew up under trying circumstances, including the time of medical school. Some of our classes were still held in the basement of ruined buildings that we used to be a chemistry department or a anatomy physiology department. So it was curiosity that me and a group of my classmates sign up for 1 year rotating internship in America, in New Jersey. And it was an interesting experience in hindsight, because in high school I did not learn much English, so I had to, of course, first learn enough English to pass the ECFMG exam, and then the several other tests. And I was surprised that I passed everything, and so did my wife. So we were both surprised, because we had learned Latin, Greek, and Hebrew in school, and no modern languages. My wife had a strong interest in French, so English was not on the horizon. But it's all possible if you suddenly have to use language to communicate with patients, and that was a bit of a challenge. And I remember I had a sample of the history and physical examination of a normal patient. So, and it started out normally developed, a white male appearing his stated age, and then the next sentence was something I didn't know. It said early baldness. I don't know what early baldness was, but my first 5 or 10 physicals for normal patients always had the word early baldness in the write-up. But there are other funny stories, and my dictations were also done. The short summaries were not so easily understandable. I learned a bit about how to pronounce English words a bit better. So one of my discharge diagnoses was sickle cell anemia, and what the well-meaning transcriptionist actually wrote down on paper was sick as hell, period, anemia. But these are just funny episodes when we had actually a very let's say formative time in that 1 year. And since I was interested in academic medicine, I had already had a taste of it on my thesis. It's an experimental thesis in electrophysiology in Freiburg, and turned out that we made an important discovery in that time. So I went back to Germany, and we all went back, of course, and started as a postdoctoral fellow as a German system requires. And during that time, I met an American physician scientist, and he became my mentor in a way. I met him at a conference in Germany, and it did not take very long, then things came together, and they were meant to be like this, I think, in hindsight. That we packed our suitcases again after less than a year and moved to Boston. And I became a resident on the Harvard Medical Service of the Boston City Hospital. And again, those were years of intense learning, serving, and involvement in, say, academic preparation for an academic career in academic medicine. So after residency, again, I was fortunate to be chosen as one of the fellows in cardiology, cardiovascular medicine at the Peter Ben Brigham Hospital. And it's one of the 3 major teaching hospitals at the Harvard Medical School. And the overall design was that I should set up a cellular electrophysiology laboratory, and my mentors group, and then continue with research and clinical training side by side. So the pattern at that time was that fellows who were chosen for a cardiology fellowship spent 6 months in the lab, 6 months in the coronary care unit or in the cath lab, and then 6 months in the lab, and so on until 2 or 3 years were completed. And that actually was a great pattern to train a physician scientist, because you were challenged each time you were in the lab and each time you were on the wards. And we had, always one attending, and I was very fortunate. I had a very good mentor and I had a very good attending too. But exhausting, of course, for the family. We had at that time already 3 children, and my wife decided that's too much for two to work, and so she made a sacrifice and gave up ophthalmology residency and stayed home with 3 children. And yeah, that was the time when I also was introduced to a new field of research, and that's cardiac metabolism, by my mentor, Mike Lesch. Dr. Lesch was relatively young faculty, but he was already well known because as a medical student he discovered an inborn error of metabolism, the Lesch-Nyhan syndrome. And it would sound unusual, but that was also his personality and his character, that he should train as a cardiologist, because normally so research oriented or research heavy young investigators in this field, they go into pediatrics, but he decided in cardiology, and much to my benefit, because he had a small lab, and I patterned my own lab after his lab ever since. He had 1 postdoctoral fellow, a research assistant, a student, and then me. And as time went by, first project went fairly well, the second project went even better. We discovered something again, and that, prepared me for my career. My mentor, who had brought me to Boston, he, in the meantime, had found somebody else, but he still supported me. And I was happy with my new environment. It's a long story. I'm sorry to be a bit long-winded now, but I think a lesson to be learned through this intense training. Being mentored by just the greatest teachers I could ask for. Often say, when people ask me, why didn't you retire? Because why don't you retire now? You are old enough to retire. And I say, well, I still feel obliged to pay back to my mentors. I haven't done my duty yet. In this environment, it was an amazing thing that I thought would have never happened to me in Germany. I was encouraged to write my own grant proposals, of course, and I saw that. It was part of the deal. And I submitted first a fellowship, and that was awarded from the Heart Association. But my second grant proposal was already, a substantial or more substantial R01 grant. And so that was in 1976, and I'm one of the few things I'm extremely grateful for is that I've had this type of funding since before I came here. So it's a good number of years. Not 50 years, but it's over 40 years. And I'm owe this entirely to all the people who who have worked in my lab, and it's very difficult sometimes, to separate your professional life and your personal life or family life. It's very difficult to separate those things at times. So I owe this to a lot of people, and I must say, just as saying goes, I've always relied on the kindness of strangers, and this year the arrival in Houston is a good example. There was everything that I had hoped for and I prepared for was here. There was lab space. The school was still relatively new, and I'm still in the same lab space. And sometimes I needed a little more, but on the whole, perfect. There's the hospital and the clinic right next door, so no long traveling or anything. And I have wonderful colleagues. Some of them were already here when I arrived, and we kept together. Dr. Smalling, one of them, Dr. Fuentes, Dr. Gould, who had actually recruited me here. Continuity is quite important. I have been very fortunate with my trainees in the lab. 8 of them are now full professors, and some of them distinguished professors, whatever, department chairs, and that's just very gratifying to see. And another 8 of them are in academic careers as associate professors, assistant professors. 3 of them are on our faculty here. One of them is in Boston on the faculty at the Massachusetts General Hospital, another one at Brown University, and so they're all doing well. So I am, I would say, very grateful for all the blessings around here in a way. And so I say, I come to work, and sometimes I run into people I haven't seen for a while, and I think about the story and in the life of an academic physician or a physician scientist. There are 3 phases. The first one is you are a young investigator, and everybody likes to invest into young investigators. That's great, and I'm very supportive of this. And then there is the time when you are running a lab or you're in charge of a group, and that is the PI. And then comes sort of a gray zone, and then suddenly comes a phase when you meet acquaintances, you haven't seen them for a while, and they come up to you and they say, "Oh, you're looking good." Oh, I say, "Yeah, you're looking good." And then the next question is, "Are you still doing research?" And then, what shall I say? I'm not working at the bench anymore. I'm writing grant applications and writing papers, and I like to teach, but perhaps I've never really or rarely been asked to teach in a full classroom, but I do give a lecture on the foundations course in the graduate school, and also every year the opening lecture at a large course over at Baylor College of Medicine, and I enjoy doing this. Although I must say, I am not a very good public speaker. And I also don't like politics. So what I remember the most about our school here, McGovern Medical School, is the times when the school came together. The school came together, and the first time I remember was about 5-6 years after I had arrived in 1987, when suddenly overnight an announcement came that 7 of the chairmen resigned or were fired. And a classic town and gown conflict. And I couldn't quite believe what happened, and so my colleagues also couldn't believe it. But I had some inklings about this, because in older universities, these town and gown conflicts, they happen all the time. So it was, to me, nothing so special. But what happened in the subsequent year, we had interim chairs, and there was a bit of a trying time, and there was a lot of concern about the future of the school and so on. But suddenly, I had a big challenge. I was elected into the faculty senate. Our first meeting, my fellow senators elected a new chair for the faculty senate. So they asked me, would you be willing to stand? And I said, I don't mind. If it's absolutely necessary, I'll do it. So they elected me to be chair of the faculty senate. Now, mind you, I detest politics, and I'm not a very good public speaker. But our challenge was, and my charge was, to do something about all these vacancies. And so somehow I mustered up the courage to go above everybody's head and contact the chancellor in Austin. And I got his ear, and he came. And I remember, again, I'm not a very good public speaker, but I remember putting together what our concerns as a faculty, and quoting heavily on the principles of academic medicine. Sir William Osler. I remember making slides myself. We still had media production at the time, and it wasn't enough time. I made my own lantern slides from Osler's writings, and we had a faculty meeting, and I presented our case, and it must have impressed the chancellor, because things started moving, and about 3 or 4 months later, we had stable administration again. And that was a moment when the school came together. And then, of course, we all lived through, those of us who have been here for a longer time, lived through the Tropical Storm Allison, which affected my lab as much as it affected, many other labs and the hospital as well. And we were, sometimes worth remembering, for 6 weeks this building was without any electricity, and we were allowed only 10 minutes a visit to come into our offices and pick up papers. And the school started to smell moldy at the time. But we all got back together onto our feet. We did during the time some very exciting experiments on circadian rhythms, so that the heart, like any other organ, is subject to changes in its metabolism activity in the course of 24 hours. So it's 3 people from the lab were actually here when the flood happened overnight. We were able to empty our freezers, and we transported part of our lab over to the School of Public Health. And the School of Public Health sits a little bit above, or ditches around, and so we translocated the lab subsequently to the School of Public Health, and were able to continue even with experimental work. Although we've lost 752 animals during that time, mice and rats, but still. It was a major bit. The spirit was that we suddenly, we had a connection over to the School of Public Health, but we were also able to share them with other labs. Dr. Hecht's lab in pediatrics as an example, or microbiology. It was a unique experience, I would say. And then, of course, school came together very recently when Dr. Strobel died, and he was fondly and rightfully remembered for his work as an educator and as an example for integrity, high standards, and ability to bridge different disciplines. The same, of course, even stronger sense, that Dr. Ed Duke passed away 2015. And Dr. Duke was I think, the model of a selfless leader. He led by example, and Texan through and through, but he also had a side to him that revealed to me, at least, kindness and humanity. And I remember when I first arrived, shortly after I spent time on the clinical service, as much as I did building my lab. And there was an emergency in the surgical intensive care unit, and we were called, I was called with my team to find out very quickly what was wrong with the patient, a severely ill patient. And I had not proven myself clinically at the time, and I was always considered sort of as a little, rat cardiologist maybe. But so I made a diagnosis, which was a drastic diagnosis, and based on my diagnosis at the bedside, Dr. Duke went ahead and do emergency surgery right away. And it turned out that my assessment was correct. And Dr. Duke has been grateful to me ever since, had been for many years. And as an example, I organized here our cardiovascular research seminars for a good number of years, maybe 20 years. And as an example for what kind of person Dr. Duke was, to support me, he came to the seminars. He came to many of the seminars. And he said, well, it interests me too. And I said, I found it amazing, actually. Dr. Duke, the quintessential Texan, and I, the quintessential German, or heavy German accent, everything. So I think we had a very special relationship. But his gift to the school was his selfless leadership, I would say. And there were many unsung heroes. Some of them passed away already, others have retired. I think, for instance, of one of your colleagues, Faye Viola, and Henny van Dyke, your predecessor, and a long list. I would be embarrassed to name them all and inadvertently leave a few people out. But we were very fortunate to have a group of people who are really truly dedicated to not only their work but to the mission of the school. And that is, to train competent and caring physicians for the future generation. And I hope in the future, we have gone through radical changes in the way we do research and the way we look after our patients. The electronic tools that we have, I hope, will allow us to spend more time again with our patients. That has been a bit of a challenge. And the reason why I enjoy seeing patients every Monday morning in my clinic is, first of all, some I have now followed for over 30 years. And there are, yes, patients, but they also become sort of part of my life. And there's no textbook that tells me the natural history of chronic stable coronary disease or certain forms of heart failure that my patients tell me by. And then increasingly in the day of information, the patients have all consulted already with Dr. Google. And what our duty is to inform the patients as we see it through our own experience, and to protect the patients too, because there is a lot of bogus information also, circulating in research. Things are similarly challenging, become more and more discovery-driven. The old way of doing research was you observed something and you thought about it, and then you said, why is it? How does it work? Hypothesis-driven. Now become more and more driven by the tools that we have, and then we get lots of results. And my area of research is metabolism, intermediate metabolism. There are thousands of different reactions and chemicals involved, and how they all interact and flow together is a big challenge that requires us to expand beyond experimental biology into computational biology, and to develop ever new tools to drill down deeper and deeper. And the challenge is the same, would be it in cardiology or in cancer research or in rheumatology or pulmonary research, neurology, wherever you turn to. So lots of new challenges. But I think the one thing that will not change to make the discoveries on basic research translatable to clinical research, and then the discoveries on clinical research translatable to finding out a mechanism through basic research. And my ideal world says it's not the expensive technology. It is the thinking, and it is often it's the right tools, but they do not necessarily have to be expensive tools. So the one thing that I've left out is a very important part in my earlier career before I came to Houston, and that was a 3-year sojourn in a world-class metabolism biochemistry lab at the University of Oxford. And I had a superb mentor in the field of metabolism, from whom I learned probably more than from my other mentors, even though it's very difficult to single out one person. But he was another one of serving leaders who was demanding in terms of the quality of the work, but also very supportive in creating the right environment, small lab with big ideas, and a productive lab. So that was my time between cardiology training in my first faculty position and coming to Houston, because it necessitated I look for a job and find a place that will give me a paycheck, and that was here. And I have often been asked why I stay here. So if you see a point in being at a certain place, and here the Texas Medical Center has grown on me. We have fruitful collaborations and interactions with colleagues at Baylor, at MD Anderson, at Rice, and also at the Methodist. So this is an ideal environment. We certainly are competitive with the other labs in other parts of the country or around the world, even though the lab is only a group of 5 people. Sometimes a few more, and sometimes maybe 1 or 2 less, but it's a small group. And I hope if I were in charge of the world, I would set up small labs all over the medical school. I was very heartened by our neighbors, immediate neighbors here, lab neighbors. That's microbiology and molecular genetics. So it's a model department of many small labs. And so, again, that's just one of the blessings here. We have wonderful neighbors who allow us to share some of the equipment. We try to reciprocate at times, but most of the time, we are the beneficiaries. And over the years, trust has developed, and we get on splendidly, even though we work on totally different aspects of research. It's marvelous in a way.